Welcome to the culture of healthcare and technologists. Healthcare settings, the places where care is delivered. So, we're going to talk about, again, the culture of healthcare. We'll explore the expectations and realities of working in healthcare settings, what it means for clinicians, and what it means for biomedical equipment technicians and clinical engineers. We're going to cover things like job expectations in different healthcare environments and how HTM or healthcare technology management professionals support safe, reliable care. We'll talk about how care is organized within a practice setting and where clinical engineering fits into the patient care process. We'll dive a little bit into privacy laws and data protection, things like HIPAA and security requirements that impact devices and systems you support. I won't get too much into that because you're going to hear a lot about that through quite a few different lectures and topics. So I won't go into it too much here. And we'll end up with professional and ethical issues, the balance between cost, compliance, efficiency, and safety when it comes to technology and healthcare. And your role as a clinical engineer, again, it isn't about fixing machines, it's about being part of the culture of care itself. So this is allowing you to ensure that every device that clinicians rely on is safe, effective, and trustworthy. The objectives for this unit, the places where healthcare is delivered, are one, to differentiate the range of care delivery organizations, including primary care, specialty care, tertiary care, hospitals, clinics, and medical home health, hospice, and long term care facilities, like we mentioned before. Analyze the organization of healthcare delivery from the perspective of continuum of care, including outpatient services, inpatient services, home care services, long term care, and life care, which we've already talked about. Evaluate the similarities and differences of community hospitals, teaching hospitals, specialty hospitals, and community health clinics, which we kind of already mentioned. All of this as it pertains to clinical engineering and biomedical equipment repair. Continuing with the objectives, we're going to describe the various department services offered by an outpatient clinic, community hospital, academic medical center, long-term care facility. Explain the ways in which different outpatient and inpatient departments interact and how their services relate. Describe ways data and information are created and used by people in different outpatient and inpatient departments. Describe ways in which medical and information technology have improved interdepartmental communication and consequently the patient experience. So this second part, this second slide here of objectives, these are actually going to lead into understanding the clinical care processes. So before you can actually start integrating technology into these processes, you have to, well, know the processes very well. So again, this is just a prerequisite for some of the following lectures. So this lecture takes a closer look at the departments and services inside healthcare organizations. We're going to start off with a broad overview describing the typical organizational structure and functions you'd expect to see. And then we're going to zoom in on the differences between organizational types. So how a community hospital might look compared to an academic medical center or a specialty facility. And along the way, we're going to highlight examples within each department. So how departments interact with each other, the types of data they use every day, and how health IT helps streamline communication and improve patient experience. Every one of these departments, whether it's imaging, surgery, pharmacy, or lab, relies on technology. So BMETs and clinical engineers, again, keep that technology safe, reliable, integrated into hospital systems. They make sure communication flows and care delivery is seamless. Departments may look different depending on the type of organization, but they all share a reliance on technology. And clinical engineering is what ensures those systems support, not disrupt, the work of patient care. Let's break down how healthcare organizations are structured. So think of an organizational chart, a simple visual of the provider's divisions, departments, and at the top, you'll usually see management, which connects to every division. Just below that, there's often a dotted line to the medical staff, a quasi autonomous group reporting to the chief medical officer or the CEO. And from there, the chart splits into divisions. And here are some of the common ones. You're going to have nursing, which includes nursing units, nursing education. You'll have clinical support services like physical therapy, radiology, social services. You'll also have ancillary services like the laboratory, transportation, food services. You also have information services, and that covers admitting, medical records, IT, And then you have facilities management, and that includes things like housekeeping, maintenance, security. But remember, this isn't like a one size fits all model. So, for instance, in some organizations, the laboratory may sit under clinical support services, while others, IT may be its own division entirely. So, large integrated health systems and academic centers usually have far more complex charts, while small community hospitals or outpatient clinics keep it simpler. Depending on the organization, healthcare technology management may appear under facilities, it may appear under information systems, or even clinical support services. But no matter where it's placed on the chart, the work of biomedical equipment repair techs and clinical engineers crosses many divisions. So, supporting nursing units, imaging labs, surgery, and IT, you're one of the few groups that connects across the entire organization, kind of like pharmacy. The organizational charts show where responsibilities lie, but clinical engineering often works across every box. You're the team that keeps the technology running everywhere, no matter where in the org chart you're placed. At the top of a healthcare organization sits the chief executive officer or the CEO, and the CEO usually reports to a board of directors. But in large systems like integrated delivery networks, they may instead report to a system level president or a chief operating officer. The chief operating officer, the COO, oversees the day-to-day operations. The chief financial officer, the CFO, they manage budgets, contracts, billing, employee compensation, and financial health of the organization. The chief medical officer, the CMO, that's usually a physician. It's almost always a physician, and they serve as a bridge between the medical staff and administration. They influence clinical care, quality improvement, and often uh, graduate medical education. Then you have the Chief Information Officer, the CIO, which is relatively new. This is someone who has grown, or a position that has grown increasingly important with the rise of electronic health records and clinical systems, and then complex IT infrastructures. The CIO manages software, networks, hardware, and sometimes telephony, right? And then we have the Chief Medical Information Officer, the CMIO. This is someone who ensures clinical information systems actually align with physician workflows. In some organizations, the CMIO reports to the CIO, while in others, they report to the CMO, right? So it just depends. So again, maybe we'll find out where they are a better fit, and maybe they are a better fit depending on what the size of the organization is, right? So HCM may not always appear at the executive table, but its work is deeply connected to the roles. So to the COO, right, HCM ensures operations aren't disrupted by device failures. To the CFO, HCM provides cost savings through lifecycle management and data on equipment value. To the CMO and the CMIO, HCM ensures that clinical devices integrate smoothly with care and the information systems that are available. And then to the CIO, HTM is like a natural partner. We bridge the medical devices with health IT infrastructure, so like the physical infrastructure. And the takeaway here is that the executive leadership shapes the vision and strategy of the healthcare organizations. Clinical engineering supports that vision by making sure the technology foundation is safe, reliable, and it aligns with patient care. Um, they make sure that it's financeable, make sure it connects with IT, and that it's helpful, not disruptive for clinical practice. So we're not done with all the chiefs in the healthcare system. Beyond the CEO's core team, you have other executive leaders that play critical roles in healthcare organizations. So let's go ahead and start off with the vice president of human resources. Right, this role oversees hiring, evaluations, employee benefits, mediation, the entire personnel process. You also have positions like the chief nursing officer or the CNO. The CNO leads nursing staff. In some organizations, the CNO right, also oversees other care departments like surgery or the ER, and sometimes non patient care areas like case management and social services. Um, the CNO and the CMO, the medical officer, they often work hand in hand to ensure safe, effective patient care delivery. In larger systems, roles tend to get more specialized. So the chief nursing information officer, much like the chief medical information officer, serves as the informatics liaison. They bridge nursing and IT. Together, the CNIO and the CMIO make sure clinical systems fit seamlessly into workflows, with data now being central to both business and patient care. Many organizations also employ a chief analytics and a data officer. This role oversees analysis and use of clinical, administrative, financial data, and they usually report to like the CEO or the COO or the CIO. Um, and if you have cybersecurity concerns, those can also be elevated by the role of the what is called the chief security officer or the CSO. And this chief security officer, CSO, they may report to the CIO, right, the chief information officer, or the COO, or directly to the CEO, being tasked with defending against data breaches and protecting critical systems. With HR, HTM depends on effective hiring, training, and retention of skilled BMETs and engineers. With the CNO, clinical engineers ensure nursing staff can trust the devices that they use daily, like IV pumps, monitors, ventilators. With the CNIOs, CMIOs, and the CIOs, a lot of, yeah, abbreviations here, HTM can collaborate closely on device integration, EHR connectivity, and workflow optimization. And then with the analytics and the data officers, HTM contributes critical equipment data for the lifecycle management and safety tracking. And then with CSOs, HTM is on the front lines of protecting network medical devices from cyber threats and also with compliance and legal. So HCM with this area plays a direct role in maintaining regulatory standards for medical devices and safety inspections. So executive roles may vary, but clinical engineering touches almost all of them from patient safety to cybersecurity to compliance. HCM professionals are woven into the leadership fabric, even if they aren't always represented on the org chart. The medical staff serves as the governing body for physicians, and in some organizations, it may also include other clinicians. So typically, the chief of staff is elected. Historically, the medical staff in hospital administration were parallel structures, but today reporting often overlaps. So together, the chief of staff and the chief medical officer oversee physician privileges, accreditation, medical policies, governance of the medical staff, and even continuing medical education. In larger health systems, you'll often see an additional role, which is the Vice President of Quality and Patient Safety. This position usually reports to the CMO and leads a broad, multidisciplinary effort across all departments to improve patient care and quality. Oh, also like safety and outcomes throughout that continuum of care. In some organizations, this VP role may instead report to the Chief Nursing Officer. The medical staff depends on obviously safe, reliable technology to practice medicine, whether it's imaging devices, surgical tools, or monitoring systems. The CMO and the VP of quality lean on data from clinical engineering to track device safety, to look at regulatory compliance, and look at performance outcomes. And as organizations push toward quality and safety benchmarks, biomedical equipment repair technologists and clinical engineers will help close the loop. They ensure that the technology that the physicians rely on will meet accreditation standards and support safe and um, just safe and quality care across the continuum. So, medical staff leadership and quality roles set the standard for safe, effective care, and clinical engineering supports those standards by keeping the technology that clinicians depend on to make sure it's reliable, compliant, and integrated into the larger safety mission. The nursing division is one of the largest and most vital parts of any healthcare organization. It's typically led by the chief nursing officer, the CNO, and they report directly to the CEO. Nursing oversees the staffing and management of inpatient units and increasingly outpatient and ambulatory departments as healthcare shifts beyond the hospital. That includes primary care and specialty clinics. General areas like pediatrics, medicine, surgery, obstetrics, gynecology, right? For inpatients, nursing covers that and a whole wide range more. Looking at things like subspecialty units like orthopedics, oncology, rehabilitation. They also oversee things like critical care units. Examples are cardiac, surgical, medical, pediatric, and neonatal intensive care. There are other critical departments like the emergency room, labor and delivery, and surgery suites, including operating rooms and post anesthesia care. So, beyond direct care, nursing is often responsible for education and professional development. So, from advancing training for staff to life support and CPR training for all hospital personnel. If you're looking at academic centers, some nursing units also function as research hubs, right? So nursing units rely on devices ranging from anything to an infusion pump, a monitor, ventilators, defibrillators, and again, they work close in hand with the biomedical equipment repair technicians and the clinical engineers to ensure that equipment is safe, calibrated, and always ready. So if you look at things like in critical care, HTMs, the healthcare technology management, their role tends to be magnified there. So if you look at because they deal with things in ICU and ERs, and that depends on uninterrupted device performance where actual seconds count. In education, clinical engineering often partners with nursing to train staff on proper device use, safety checks they can do, and some basic troubleshooting. And nursing may be the face of bedside care, but clinical engineering is the backbone that ensures the technology that nurses depend on works flawlessly, making sure that it supports patient care, safety, education across the entire organization. Clinical support services, these are also called allied health. They make up a wide range of specialized departments that directly support diagnosis and treatment. And how these services are managed depends on the organization. Some health systems have a dedicated officer reporting straight to the CEO. Others combine clinical support and ancillary services into diagnostics and therapeutic divisions. And many hospitals, individual allied health departments report directly to the COO or some other executive. Some examples of this could include radiology, which are responsible for X-rays, MRI, CT. Radiology also supports therapeutic procedures through interventional radiology. Other departments would be cardiology, which handles diagnostic studies like EKGs, stress tests, and echocardiograms, and also more invasive work like cardiac catheterization. When we're looking at the therapeutic services, these can include things like physical therapy, which helps patients recover from injuries or disease related limitations. It could be pharmacy, overseeing the acquisition, storage, and safe dispensing of medications. And it can be social services, which provide things like counseling. They help connect families with financial assistance and they help coordinate discharge planning. So it's worth noting that reporting structures can vary. For instance, in some organizations, the laboratory may be grouped under clinical support services, while social services might report to nursing. So every one of these departments depends on technology. So from MRI and CT scanners and radiology to EKG systems and cardiology to things like infusion pumps, automated dispensing cabinets in pharmacy, healthcare technology management professionals. They ensure that the technology in these highly specialized areas is safe, reliable, and that it's fully integrated into the hospital IT system. Clinical support services are where diagnosis and treatment meet. Clinical engineering plays a vital role in making sure that those devices in these departments are accurate, they're functional, and that they align with the clinical workflow so that clinicians can focus on care and not worry so much about troubleshooting. Ancillary services are the departments that keep a hospital running smoothly but behind the scenes. And just like clinical support, their management structure can vary. So some organizations have a senior officer for ancillary services reporting directly to the CEO. Others merge ancillary with clinical support services and divide them into diagnostics and therapeutic branches. And in many systems, managers of individual ancillary departments, they just report simply to the or directly to the COO again, or some other executive designated person, right? And these examples can be things like the laboratory, transportation, food services, central supply. And let me talk a little bit more about each one of these. So within the laboratory, right, they handle collection, analysis, and reporting of those tests. And it often overlaps with clinical support services, giving the technical expertise that's required for this. If you're talking about transportation, which ensures patients get safely from, let's say, admitting to their unit or in between units, diagnostic and surgery, right? Want to make sure everyone gets to where they're going on time and safely. Food services, delivering patient meals and running the cafeteria for staff, visitors, and families. That's a big thing to handle. And then central supply was the other one I mentioned. It's on the slide. And they manage inventory and ensure that every department has the supplies needed for patient care and daily operations. And as clinical engineers, right, even ancillary departments rely heavily on technology. Think of lab analyzers, pneumatic tube systems, and yes, I remember using pneumatic tube systems in pharmacy way back in the 90s. We had patient transport monitoring devices, food service refrigeration, warming units, and the supply chain tracking system. All of that needs to be functional and safe. Again, kind of interesting that even my time in pharmacy, yeah, I still had to deal a lot with the supply chain as we got new medications, boxes and boxes of IVs, and you name it. But BMETs and clinical engineers, they'll support or they'll interface with this equipment to ensure that it integrates with the clinical systems and meets regulatory standards. So ancillary services may not always be at the bedside, but they're essential to patient care. Clinical engineering supports them by making sure the technology that powers these behind the scenes functions is reliable so clinicians and patients experience seamless, safe care. And just to kind of add one more thing. So the automated dispensing systems that we used to have back in the 90s, back then, at least the hospital that I was at, the biomeds didn't touch that. So they trusted me since I had a skill set in electronics to actually work on it, repair it, and again, I was the one who used it most of the time, so I knew how it was supposed to function. So yeah, I wasn't actually in biomed or clinical engineering at the time. I was in pharmacy, but little did I know I'd end up being a clinical engineer one day. Information departments in healthcare organizations, they're essential, but their management structure can look different depending on the system. So in some organizations, they have a senior officer reporting directly to the CEO. In others, department directors report through the CEO, COO, or some other executive. Right? If we look at things like admitting, right? Admitting is often the first stop for patients, and this team, this department collects demographic and payer information. So the reason for admissions, right? Why are they there in the hospital? And they also it's a place where they get those general consent orders. And they also ensure compliance with things like HIPAA, and they may also ask about advanced directives for care. Then we have the medical records department, which manages the patient's records. So traditionally, this was all paper, but today nearly everything is electronic. That shift has transformed the skill set that's required for this role, moving from paper management to electronic data systems. Right, electronic records make it easier to access and retrieve patient information, not only for care, but also for billing, audits, and other things like research. So medical records now work closely with information technology on maintaining electronic health records and deploying new systems. Believe it or not, in some of the old job postings for these fields, knowing the alphabet and knowing a filing system and knowing an alphabetical filing system was one of the job requirements. I didn't actually think that they meant do you know your ABCs, but basically, yeah, that's what it meant. Um, so yeah, that's back in the old days of paper. So admitting in medical records, they may seem administrative, but they tie directly into the technologies. Again, biomeds and clinical engineers manage it and devices across the hospital from monitors to diagnostic systems. They feed information into the EHR. So for HTM professionals, interoperability, data integration, and compliance are key. Keeping devices properly integrated ensures that clinicians and administrators can trust the data flowing into the medical records. So, information departments manage the flow of patient data across the organizations, and clinical engineering makes sure the devices generate that data seamlessly, securely, and accurately into the system. And without that, the information foundation of modern healthcare wouldn't hold up. So, again, one last thing on this slide. Back when I worked in pharmacy, we were responsible for double checking the MARs and updating the MARs as far as medications were concerned. And the training that I got for that job when the first day I did it was like little to none. But luckily, I took my time, went slow, made sure I did everything right, asked questions, and didn't do anything I wasn't supposed to do. But the fact that I had access to a lot of these records, and these records were used for scheduling surgical rooms, for example. Yeah, I was taken back. Again, we said the information technology department is the backbone of a healthcare organization's digital infrastructure, and it manages hardware, software, and network connectivity right down to the physical security of the data. So their responsibilities span acquisition, implementation, and ongoing support for these systems. So with the rise of EHRs, electronic health records, clinical systems, advanced billing platforms, mobile devices, and the integration of medical device uh, source data, all of this came into play. And IT transformed it into what we now call health information systems and technology. So today's IT departments do far more than manage servers and software. They function as business analysts, aligning technology with clinical workflows and operational processes. They support adoption and effective use, making sure that systems actually help providers and staff do their work. And they leverage data analytics, turning clinical, business, and financial data into actionable information for better decision making. And here's where clinical engineers have a big role to play. Modern IT and HCM overlap more than ever. Infusion pumps, right, now smart infusion pumps, patient monitors, imaging systems, and ventilators, they all generate data that has to flow into the EHR and to analytic systems. So BMS and clinical engineers ensure that devices are safe, accurate, while IT ensures that the data flows securely and reliably across the network. The IT department provides that infrastructure, but clinical engineering ensures the devices feeding into that infrastructure are trustworthy. So together, these teams make up the digital and technical backbone of healthcare, keeping operations efficient, safe, and aligned with organizational goals. The facilities management division. So they keep physical hospitals running, the physical part of the hospital. It's usually overseen by a senior manager reporting to the COO. And so we got things like housekeeping, maintenance, security, where housekeeping is responsible for cleaning and often laundry services. Maintenance, which covers day to day repairs and replacement, but also critical systems like electrical power, backup generators, and heating and cooling, which is pretty critical for the patient. Security manages parking control, ID badges, and protecting patient belongings during admission. And why or where is clinical engineering? How do they overlap with this? So, while facilities keeps the building safe, clinical engineering keeps the technology inside that building safe. HTM teams, they often work closely with facilities. They do this because they want to support that critical infrastructure like backup power for life support equipment, for example, environmental controls for imaging suites or labs, and even security integrations that are tied to the clinical systems. Where facilities management ensures the hospital's environment is safe and functional, clinical engineering ensures that the medical technology within that environment is reliable and trusted. So together they create the foundation for patient care. Every healthcare organization, whether it's large or small, has a set of core functions that make care possible. And these include things like management, medical staff, nursing, clinical support, ancillary services, information systems, and obviously facilities management. But how do those functions look? How they look depends on the size and the type of organization. So if you're looking at a small community health clinic, the senior physician and the office manager, they may handle administration. The medical staff might be just a few providers, and nursing could be a single nurse with several medical assistants. Those assistants may also help with limited clinical support and ancillary services like simple lab tests or basic diagnostics. The office staff often double up on registration, billing, referrals, and medical records. And what about IT support for something this small? It's often outsourced, right? And facilities management, it could be a mix of office staff and contracted cleaning and maintenance contractors. But as organizations grow, those same functions expand, and that requires dedicated staff, training, and eventually an entire division with multiple departments. Community hospitals and academic hospitals share many of the same structures for clinical care, but academic centers add two big responsibilities. One is teaching, and the other one is research. And these can be major undertakings with their own problems, looking at the division itself and personnel. So even in the smallest clinics, technology is present. The basic diagnostic equipment like small lab analyzers or some small form of an electronic health record, right? So in larger systems, the footprint expands to thousands of devices across every division, and biomedical equipment repair techs and clinical engineers are the teams that are ensuring those devices are safe, functional, and that they integrate into the organization's core functions. So the structure of healthcare organizations may scale up from simple to complex, but the technology is already woven into all of them. Clinical engineering is the constant. So it makes sure that tech supports are there, that they care, and no matter the size of the organization, big or small. Healthcare organizations rely on many different types of data to gather, record, and track patient information. So some of it's narrative. Think of patient history, physical exams, notes, procedures, reports, or surgical summaries, all recorded like as free text, basically free writing. Some of it's numerical, so measures like the patient's weight, their vital signs, or their body fluids. And some of it comes as digital signals. So today, devices like the EKG, the electrocardiograph, they capture electrical activity while monitors record pressures like blood pressure or cardiac output. Increasingly, these signals transfer directly into electronic health records. And it goes further. Devices such as infusion pumps and ventilators can now feed their data straight into an EHR. There's no manual entry required anymore if you got the right device. You also have visual data, and that's essential. Things like drawings, photographs, and digital images, all used to help document things like wounds, injuries, surgeries, and it makes it easier to track healing over time. Imaging from things like X ray to MRI is now almost universally stored and shared in some digital format. And every one of these data systems depends on what? Safe, reliable devices. And that's where biomedical equipment repair techs and clinical engineers ensure that monitors, infusion pumps, ventilators, imaging systems, that all that capture and transmit accurate information into the EHR. And without that assurance, clinicians can't trust the data guiding their decisions. So healthcare data takes many forms. You can have a narrative, a numerical, a digital, and a visual. But clinical engineering ensures the technology behind the data is functionally accurate, seamlessly connected to the systems that providers rely on. In healthcare, data has been transmitted in many different ways, some efficient, some less than ideal. We're going to look at verbal communication, and we'll look at some other things like paper, medical records, and we'll look at some analog formats, and we'll talk about what those mean. But when we're dealing with like verbal communication, whether it's in person or by phone, it has the advantage of being direct and immediate, but there's a downside. There's usually no permanent record. Even audio recordings can be clunky, and since they force the user to listen to the entire conversation, it can be burdensome. Burdensome? Yeah. But for decades, we've been using paper medical records, where that was the main way of doing things. Paper came with big challenges, though. Legibility, right? So I used to work in pharmacy, as I mentioned, and I promise you, they weren't joking about the legibility. Again, having access and consistency within medical records, and all of this was an issue, right? Only one person could use a record at a time, and there could be multiple versions that exist for the same record across departments if they were, being copied and so forth. If we look at things like analog formats, then that means looking at things like paper EKG strips, lab reports that are written, or just X-ray films alone. And I'm talking about the old actual film, not the digital reproduction that you see on computers, right? All of that has to be stored. It has to be stored somewhere. So you needed a place for central files. And these methods created the same availability problems as paper. Access was limited, duplication was difficult, and coordination between departments could suffer. Um, yeah, I was going to tell you a quick story, but this is not the time for that. So let's talk about where clinical engineering comes into play. So again, paper and analog formats created bottlenecks during this time, and the shift toward digital systems now relies on reliable devices and interfaces. And again, that's where biomedical equipment repair techs and clinical engineers come into play. They ensure that equipment like the EKG machine or an imaging system or some lab analyzer accurately captures and transmits data into the electronic system. Without this HTM support, the benefits of digital communication can start breaking down, and it leaves clinicians facing the same frustrations as they did when it was the paper era. So, verbal, paper, analog records once carried healthcare data, but they had serious limitations. Today's shift to the digital system provides access and reliability, and clinical engineering plays a very key role in making that transition safe and trustworthy. So, electronic health records, they've transformed the way healthcare organizations capture and share information. Unlike the old paper records, EHRs eliminate duplication and they eliminate the access problems. They provide a single record that multiple users can view. They can view them anytime, anywhere with a right security access. And that means that if you have better data consistency, higher quality, and quicker access to the information uh, that providers need, at the point of care, it produces better medicine. Right? EHRs also enable information sharing across organizations, not just within the same organization, but across different organizations. A patient's record might include entries from a retail clinic or an out of network provider. And that kind of integration is vital for giving clinicians the full picture of a patient's history. It also helps for ensuring a smooth coordination across the entire continuum of care. And when we're looking at patient engagement, so it adds another layer. Patient source data is becoming critical, whether it's self reported metrics, home monitoring results, or updates through digital tools. Right? Personal health records or PHRs allow patients to privately and securely manage their own health information. So many organizations now offer patient portals. They're secure online platforms and they allow patients to log in anytime to review their health record, health information. They can review their lab results or communicate with other providers. And all of this depends on the devices feeding accurate data into the record. Monitors, infusion pumps, ventilators, imaging systems. If the data they produce isn't reliable, the EHR can't be trusted. And biomedical equipment repair techs and clinical engineers will ensure these systems integrate properly and securely, while the IT manages the infrastructure and user access. So together, they make a digital record safe and actionable. So electronic records give providers and patients the full picture of care, consistent, kinetic, I meant to say connected, and accessible, but it could be kinetic, right? So what else? That's it. Where clinical engineering comes into play is that they ensure the devices behind the data are accurate and reliable, keeping the digital record trustworthy. So the electronic health records don't just make life easier for providers, they also boost patient satisfaction. And here's why. Patients don't have to repeat the same information over and over when visiting new providers or departments. So think about this. Anytime you've ever gone to the doctor and you've had to fill out those forms, when you used to do this on paper, you'd have to go back and fill out the exact same forms again just in case something's changed. But nowadays, like when I go to my physician, I have to fill out those forms, but they're electronic. They stored the information that I um, inserted or entered last time, so it keeps a record of that. If I need to add anything to it, it's very simple, and I don't have to recreate the whole thing. So I really enjoy the patient portal that I use. But every department in healthcare, every organization can access the results of tests and past visits. So no more chasing down records or explaining the purpose of each appointment. I remember hearing a joke about this. I don't remember the actual joke, but it had to do with someone running around looking for, I don't know, they were looking for some kind of form and they were running around all over the place. But anyway, let me get back to the lecture before I go off on something so unrelated. Right. So when you talk about EHRs, they take the burden off patients for tracking demographic information, insurance, medications, allergies, past illnesses. Especially, it's helpful when a patient is too ill or injured to speak for themselves. right? So sharing this information by sharing lab and imaging results across the organizations, EHRs reduce duplicate tests, which cuts costs and improves efficiency for the patient. Um, and it all depends on the devices feeding data into the EHR. So if you have things like monitors, lab analyzers, infusion pumps, imaging systems, right, biomedical equipment repair techs, and clinical engineers, they ensure that data is accurate, devices are integrated, and workflows are reliable. So without that technical foundation, the patient experience would suffer, and the promise of EHRs couldn't be realized. EHRs improve patient satisfaction by simplifying communication, reducing redundancy, and making care more seamless. So, clinical engineering ensures the technology behind those records is accurate, connected, and dependable. So, that is the end of this the healthcare settings, places where care is delivered. We talked about or we explored the divisions, departments, and services that you'll find in outpatient clinics, community hospitals, academic medical centers, and long term care facilities. We looked at how these departments interact and the services that they deliver together. So, we also examined the flow of data and information and how patient records and results move across departments, and how information technology has reshaped communication, coordination, and the patient experience. So, for clinical engineers, your work supports every one of these divisions, from outpatient clinics to tertiary academic centers, from labs to ICUs. Reliable technology is that thread that holds care delivery together. And as IT systems become more integrated with devices, your partnership with clinical information and the teams is critical to both patient and efficiency. So, the final thought here is that healthcare organizations may differ in size and structure, but they all depend on an accurate data set and safe, dependable technology. Clinical engineering ensures that those systems work, making patient care seamless across settings. This concludes our unit on healthcare settings, the places where care is delivered. So, throughout this unit, we explored the range of healthcare organizations from primary to secondary to tertiary care. We looked at unique organizational models, the relationship between them, and the general structure of healthcare. We also walked through the major divisions, so nursing, clinical support, ancillary services, information systems, and facilities management, and gave examples of how the departments that make them up um, can work together, right? So we also examined how technology is shaping communication and patient experience. So from EHRs to medical devices, technology is no longer just a tool. It's woven into every part of care delivery. And for clinical engineers, no matter the size or type of organization, technology underpins every division, every department, and every patient interaction. So, PMETs and clinical engineers are that quiet force that ensures the technology is safe, reliable, and integrated most of all. So, patients receive the best care and provides um, trust in the system that they use. Also, one last thought here is that healthcare settings are diverse, but they're all connected by a common thread, and people and technology work together toward that. Clinical engineering is it's the bridge that makes the connection strong, dependable, and safe.